Well, hello, and welcome to the 27th Degree with Chris and Nancy. This is episode number 56, and as you may have guessed, this is our Halloween special. Today we'll be exploring the spooky side of Newport with our guest, John Brennan, the longest tenured guide from Newport Ghost Tours. Before we begin our conversation, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Bay Coast Bank. Bay Coast Bank is just right for all of your financial needs. Visit baycoast.bank or call 508-678-7641 to learn more. As always, you can support the 27th Degree with Chris and Nancy by signing up as a patron. Go to patron.podbean.com/the27th Degree, or you can click on the link on our Facebook page. $5 a month gets you a shout out, exclusive content, and sneak peeks to upcoming shows. You can find the 27th Degree across social media, including Facebook, Instagram, and your favorite podcast platform. You can also subscribe to 27 Degrees Consulting on YouTube. So, yes.
We have two guests today.
Oh, yes. We have, other than John, of course, who is our main guest, we do have two other guests today. Do you want to introduce the guests?
Well, we have John as guest one. Guest two is Mr. Bones. He's behind us.
Great, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, everyone.
He's on loan from the Ewart family. Thank you so much.
Yes, and our you want to mention we have another guest, too.
What, are you talking about Tyler?
Tyler, yes.
Oh, yeah. So you may hear Tyler pop in here and there. He's a producer of our show, and he has a special fondness for all things Halloween.
So Tyler may pop in here and there, so we'll see how this goes. So anyway, let's get going. So John, we're really excited to have you here. This is really a fun thing. We love to do these holiday specials. And why don't you start by just telling us a little bit about yourself?
Oh, I'm very happy to be here. It's a really exciting. And thank you to Chris and Nancy for inviting me. And thank you to Tyler for basically helping me muddle through the world of the living technology that's beyond my scope of training. I've been a ghost tour guide for 19 years. The company's been around for 20, and I joined them in their second year. It's something that I really enjoy. I love working with the legends and the history of Newport. I find that a lot of times our history books tell one version of events. As A. Whitney Brown said, the past actually happened. History is just what got written down. But I think that our legends, the kind of word of mouth stories, often give a deeper version of the truth. And the ghost stories are really a part of that. And I'm very passionate about local history. I wrote a book with a local artist named Rafael Medina called Newport Live. He's been painting scenes in Newport for 35 years. And I added in my 2 cents worth of historical background to the paintings. And we had so much fun with that. Now we're working on a book of Newport's food history, which is going to make me a lot heavier over the next few months. So that's going to be called Newport Eats. My wife runs a local knitting store called Knitting Needles here in Newport. She's got a degree in theater costuming and ancient textiles. So she and I are working on a book together about what we're calling it the fashions of Christ. It's about the ancient fashions of the time of Jesus. And I'm working on my own project of historic Newport love stories called Newport Lovers and Dreamers and Dogs.
I love that.
John, you're a really busy guy, aren't you?
I am. I also do a lot of theater. I've been doing theater for 25 years. I was in the Secrets of Haunted New England, which is on all of the cable channels around this time of year. I was in an episode of Ghost Hunters, and I was in a horror film called Telltale, and in the 2016 version of Ghostbusters. I also do a lot of local theater, and next up I'm on stage in a local play, a one-man show called Under the Lintel, which will be performed at the Edward King House in November from the 16th through the 20th.
Nice.
Wow.
Oh, my word. Yeah, I guess you are a little bit busy.
Yeah.
And you're busy with a ghost tour tonight, I understand.
Yes, I leave right from here to do a private ghost tour. And then I do a public ghost tour tomorrow night. So it's a busy time of year.
Of course.
How did you get into the ghost tours? I'm interested in that.
It was, and he hires actors. And so the online posting was for actor in Newport back in 2002. And by the time I saw this ad and responded, they were closed for the season and they didn't get back to me till the following spring. And frankly, if they had gotten right back to me, I would have probably told them, oh, I don't really believe in ghosts. And so I would have declined the job. But that winter was the winter of the station nightclub fire.
Oh,
And my brother was a survivor of that fire, fortunately, but he did spend 2 weeks in a coma. And when he came out of the coma, he said to us that the ghost of my recently deceased grandmother had appeared to him in the flames. He said he had given up, decided it was on fire and didn't know how to get out. So he sat down on the stage and he said my grandmother's ghost appeared to him and led him out. And he was one of the last people to get out of the building alive. And he had always been the kind of person that absolutely did not believe in ghosts. He would have made fun of you for even bringing up the idea. So for him to kind of say that this is how he was saved was it at least opened me up to the idea. And then just a few months later, Ghost Tours responded to my old email saying, you still want the job? And I said, you know what? I think I'm ready to accept the idea. And 19 years later, here I am.
here you are.
So, John, like when I hear Newport, I think of like yachts and big mansions and touristy stuff. Like I'm not thinking spooky or haunted. So, I mean, but evidently Newport has a pretty in-depth history with all that stuff.
Newport, and I like to point this out, that we've had people living here for probably as much as 30,000 years, but permanently we've had the Wampanoag and the Narragansett living in the area for at least 12 to 15,000 years. Newport is a very organic city. It doesn't have a strict layout. The animals that walked this earth 12,000 years ago as the Ice Age receded set the paths that became the hunting paths for the Wampanoag and the Narragansett. And in many cases, those are the streets of Newport today.
That's cool.
So these beautiful societies lived here for generation upon generation. Aquidneck literally means island of peace because it was the border between the two tribes. And this is where they had settled on agreements about whose property line was where. And this became their island of peace. It was really idyllic. Europeans arrived in 1638, led by Anne Hutchinson, who was thrown out of Massachusetts, first of all, for being a woman who dared to preach. But secondly, the group that she led, the Antinomians, they taught that there shouldn't be any ministers. She said, who does this guy think he is, standing in a pulpit dictating morality to the rest of us? So she wanted to eliminate ministers from the church. The ministers who ruled Massachusetts weren't keen on that. And so out she went with the help of Roger Williams. She became the first woman to settle a community in the New World and settled Portsmouth in 1638. In another great thing that the Antinomians taught was they said, Jesus died for our sins. Therefore, as long as you accept Jesus in your heart, you're absolved of all sin, not just the ones you've already committed, but any you might think about doing later on tonight.
No,
said,
that's a little dangerous.
Have a good time. So they settled with a sort of sliding scale of morality.
Yeah.
And in 1639, some of our followers, led by William Coddington, came south and founded Newport on the southern end of the island. It grew to become the fifth largest and fifth wealthiest city in the New World, every bit a rival of New York, Boston, and Philadelphia. But during the American Revolution, the British occupied the city for most of the war. And by the war's end, Newport was devastated. About a third to a half of the buildings were completely destroyed, and at least half of the people moved out or died and never returned.
Oh, geez.
So Newport sank into poverty, which it actually hasn't quite recovered from yet. Believe it or not, we rank near the bottom in Rhode Island in per capita income and near the top in per capita crime and homelessness. And as historians say, poverty preserves. In other communities, you have an old house, you tear it down, Newporters are forced to make do. And so today, roughly 1/3 of all of the pre-Revolutionary War era homes in the United States are in Newport. It's about 800 colonial homes. And when you're walking past houses that are hundreds of years old, you've got hundreds of years worth of ghost stories. And especially with that sliding scale of morality, you've got an interesting culture to base a lot of interesting ghost stories on.
That's
John,
great.
who's the most like well-known ghost in Newport?
It's I think a lot of our ghosts tend to be locally well known. Newport's history is in many ways a history that even in Newport people are surprised.
Right.
You know, there are we have shipwrecks that happened even in the 50s.
Oh, that's
that
right too.
are largely forgotten. Two tankers collided, I think in 1962 or so, right here in Newport Harbor, and both of them exploded. Dozens of people died. It was just Eisenhower was president. It was right next to the Eisenhower White House that one of the burning tankers landed, beached itself. And yet you ask people about it, then it's largely forgotten. So just like the history of Newport, a lot of the ghost stories kind of are people that they have local claims to fame instead of being nationally known. I would like to say that the ghost of George Washington is here, or John Kennedy, or Eisenhower. But I would say our probably most famous ghost is Rebecca Cornell.
And who is she?
In 1637, Rebecca Cornell was living up in Portsmouth. She was one of the founders of Portsmouth. So, no, it's 1663. I'm sorry. Rebecca Cornell was one of the founders of Portsmouth. And so she was living in Portsmouth. She had inherited a fortune from her husband, Thomas Cornell. But typically, at that time period, a woman didn't inherit her husband's money. In fact, in most of the colonies, she was legally not entitled to inherit that fortune. But Rhode Island had specific rules allowing women to inherit. And if a woman inherited a fortune, she even became a voting member of the colony as the head of the household. So Rebecca had inherited this fortune that becomes the fortune that founds Cornell University. Her son Thomas Jr. had expected to inherit it.
Sounds that might be Rebecca right there. Do you hear it?
Maybe.
I think Rebecca might be trying to send a message to us.
We've got some ambiance tonight, okay?
Rebecca has a deep voice.
What are you talking about? This is Mr. Bones. Look me in the ocular sockets when you talk about me.
All right. Well,
Please, sir, continue. I was very invested in your story.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Rebecca, always a pleasure. Rebecca, her son had expected to inherit a fortune, found himself destitute, so she invited him to move in with her in the family mansion on the condition that he pay rent and hire a maid to help the elderly woman around the house. But once he settled in, he reneged on his promise, saying, I can't afford the rent or the maid unless you forgive all of my debts. She didn't forgive his debts, and things went from bad to worse for the poor woman. She starts to complain that the family's leaving her to do the chores, tending to the garden, the animals, and the cleaning. She tells one neighbor, I'm tired of chasing after the pigs. And we still don't know if she meant the four-legged kind or the two-legged kind. She starts to complain that the family is neglecting her, saying one day she was out gathering firewood and she slipped and fell in the snow. And although she could clearly see her son watching through the window, nobody came to help the elderly woman up. And finally, she starts to complain that the family's even having things for dinner that she either cannot or will not eat, in what she believes is a deliberate attempt to make sure that she doesn't bother them at dinner time. And on the evening of February 8th, 1673, the family has dried salted mackerel for dinner. It's the dish that the elderly Rebecca, no teeth, is not going to enjoy. She complains that salted mackerel makes her dry in the night. So she stays in her room. After dinner, Edward Cornell goes in to check on her. When he opens the door to her room, black smoke billows out, and Thomas rushes in and finds his mother burned almost beyond recognition. It's ruled natural causes because you have an elderly woman in front of a roaring fire on a cold February night. When last seen alive, she was smoking a pipe, so embers from the pipe or the fireplace are believed to have caused the flames in that room that evening. Though there are some discrepancies in the case. This family's in the very next room, separated only by thin wooden planks. And yet
Right.
nobody smells anything
Sounds a
unusual.
little shady.
Sounds fishy to
Nobody
me.
hears any unusual noises, and her body is found on the opposite side of the room from the fireplace. But Rebecca is laid to rest in peace, hopefully for all eternity. And yet, just 3 nights after her burial, her brother John Briggs is awakened in the dead of night by the blankets being ripped violently off of him. He opens his eyes to find a dark specter hovering over his bed, and he exclaims, "In the name of God, what art thou?" The specter replies, "It is I, your sister Cornell. See how I was burnt by the fire. See how I was burnt by the fire." And at that moment, flames light up the room, lighting the room as bright as the dawn, and the specter pulls apart her clothing to reveal a puncture wound in her stomach.
Oh.
Next day, John Briggs tells everybody about this ghostly visitation, and based on his story, a jury of 24 men dig up Rebecca's body. Closer examination finds a puncture wound in her stomach, and so they conclude she'd been stabbed to death, and the fire set to cover up the crime.
Wow.
The last person seen with her alive is her son Thomas, so he's put on trial for her murder. The only evidence presented against him is the testimony of his mother's ghost. But in 1673, that was enough to get a conviction, and he was executed by hanging for the murder of his mother. In fact, after his death, his wife gave birth to a baby girl she named named Innocent Cornell. And Innocent grows up to have her own children until 5 generations later, her descendant, Andrew and Sarah Borden of Fall River, gave birth to a baby girl they named Lizzie.
No way.
So,
interesting.
The Lizzie Borden story is linked tightly to the Rebecca Cornell story, and that is a link that creates fame for Rebecca here in Newport.
Wow.
Probably our most famous ghostly spirit.
This has to be the only time that someone was convicted on the testimony of a ghost, I'm thinking, in the history of the U.S.
It was rare in England, but this is, as far as we know, the only time in America that it happened.
Interesting.
So, John, when you're doing your ghost tours, like where do you go, and what kind of things do you cover, and what do you know about Newport? Well, this is going to be a dumb question because you know a lot more about Newport than I do. But again, what are some of the things that surprise people about Newport and the backstories and all?
There's a lot of poverty in Newport, historically in particular. Newport is a community that was sadly built by blood. So we have, unfortunately, a very long history with slavery. And slavery is what really, really built the city of Newport to what it is today. Also piracy. We have a strong history with pirates.
Yeah.
The people that came from other colonies really were the guys that very often were escaping justice. Now the criminals are writing the laws here in Newport. So the Newport laws were very forgiving of pirates. A retired pirate was immune from prosecution, but a pirate is defined as a man with a weapon on the high seas. The minute you take away his weapon or take him off of the water,
he's a sailor.
By definition, he's retired. So we become a pirate community.
Do you have any good pirate ghost stories?
We actually are the home of the largest public execution in American history.
Ooh.
Oh, really?
In 1723, the British Admiralty basically gave us an ultimatum. They said, either you outlaw piracy or we'll make you a part of Massachusetts. Ooh. And let's face it, nobody here wanted to learn that language. So we outlawed piracy, captured a pirate vessel called the Fortune, put 26 men on trial and found them guilty of piracy. They were sentenced to, in typical Newport fashion, first be humiliated. We often liked to humiliate people,
of course,
who were guilty of crimes. So we forced them to write poetry.
No, sir.
Poem had to be why the children of Newport should not pursue a life of piracy. Then they were all brought to the water's edge. We built them their own gallows. And in a July morning in 1723, we lined them up, forced them to recite poems in front of a crowd of thousands that had gathered for hundreds of miles from every one of the colonies, from New York and all of the New England colonies. And then all 26 men were simultaneously hanged in the largest execution in American history. Then we left the bodies hanging as a warning to other pirates in the area and didn't cut them down until October. On Halloween, we cut them down and buried them face down at low tide at the water's edge so that the tide will forever ebb and flow over their corpses and leave their spirits no rest for eternity.
Huh.
Naturally, we took them to the outskirts of town, and today the only thing that stands on top of that mass pirate grave is a hotel called Gurney's, which is
it
the
open?
highest
Oh,
hotel
yeah.
here in Newport.
It's over.
Beautiful ocean views.
Sure,
but if you look towards
sure.
the bridge, you're overlooking a mass pirate grave.
Yeah, a little foot sticks
That's
up in the
amazing,
sand.
yeah.
Not a problem. Not
That's
a problem.
wild.
You never know what you're going to find in the waters here, in the mud here in Newport.
So, are there those pirate ghosts that are around? Are there stories about the ghosts of those?
There are
pirates?
a lot of stories. In fact, when people say, "Have I ever seen anything?" My wife and I, one evening, were sitting on the seawall over there at Kearney's Hotel back when it was a DoubleTree Islander. And we were sitting on the seawall just admiring the bridge on one of our dates. And these just dozens of beautiful orbs glowing, floating about 2 to 3 feet above the water, just wafted past us on the breeze and disappeared in the night. So when I learned of our pirate ghosts, I said to myself, I wonder if that's what I had seen that evening.
John, why is it when you hear about these ghost stories that most of the ghosts, it seems to me at least, that people are exposed to or interact with, they die a very, traumatic death, or, it's not people who die peacefully of natural causes. It's usually someone who has something horrible happen to them. Do you have any take on that?
I do. I think that what would leave somebody earthbound? There's a lot of energy involved, and there has to be a strong emotional connection to the living plane, if you will. And I really think that if there are going to be ghosts, it's going to be the ghosts of people who met violent ends or met their last moments in fear or in doubt or in some sort of turmoil.
Mm.
John, do you go around any graveyards?
I do.
Ooh.
And I have, let me see if I can share this. I have some pictures. I'm fascinated by the graves.
Oh.
This
Nice.
is a grave by a great family out of Boston called the Mumford family. And they like to carve on their headstones something called the Puritan Death Head. As you can see right here, this is the human skull with wings coming out from behind it. This is Anne Mumford, who was a family member who died here in Newport. So this is in our common burying ground. If you notice down at the bottom, the death date is 1697 and 8.
What does that
It was
mean?
time between the Julian and the Gregorian calendar. We were changing to the new calendar. And so headstone carvers were a little bit on the fence about what the year is, depended on whether you were going by one calendar or the other.
Hey, I'm just impressed she's 63 and
Wow,
back in
yeah.
the 1600s. That's
Thing is, when we talk about the fact that people had a shorter life expectancy, a lot of that is weighed down by people died before they were 5.
Okay.
If you take out those people that made it past age about 15, then the chances that they were going to make it into their 70s or 80s were not significantly different than they are today.
fair point.
A little bit lower, but it's still, people tended to make it to old age once they made it past the 15th birthday.
John, was it common to do that type of carving on stones?
It was. The Mumford family kind of pioneered that here in the colonies. The other thing they do this sort of cheerful carving up the side. And these are all fruits and vegetables taken out of the Bible that are specifically mentioned in the Garden of Eden. So you can see these pomegranates. And they always arrange right about this level, the pomegranates with the stems out. And it's odd that this is a hand-shaped pointer. But they're deliberately made to look like bare breasts.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was
and
going to
That
say,
works great with a
I didn't
hand
really see
pointer.
pomegranates there, but that's okay. Yeah.
the connection is that the
love
woman's
the hand
breasts
pointer,
were
too.
they were less sexualized in the Puritan era, and they had a lot more to do with feeding babies and birth and
Okay.
Functional.
life and rebirth. And so that imagery, it's the only time you could allow just a little dirty picture was on your grave.
That's great.
That's cool.
Very
And
interesting.
there we go. Well, let's
I should
go
say,
for it.
too, if anyone's listening to the podcast, we have our YouTube channel, 27 Degrees Consulting, if you search on YouTube, and you'll be able to see all these pictures up on our YouTube channel.
So then they had, oh, that's the wrong button. The Mumford family was really, they were doing great works with that. One of the people that worked for them very briefly was a man named John Stevens, who came to Newport, and he realized that nobody was making headstones in Newport at the time. So he started, and you can see he, after 2 weeks of apprenticing to the Mumfords, was not quite as talented
No.
as they are. This is the same carving done by John Stevens.
Looks like I did it.
It does. I actually one day as an experiment, I bought a piece of flagstone and found that I'm a better stone carver than John Stevens was.
Oh, my God.
But also, just his style was sloppy.
Yeah.
Here lieth Netha. Oops, ran out of room. Neil, an interesting spelling of Neil. He just had no problem splitting the boy's name up.
Oh, my God.
But he was the only guy in town, so his business thrived. He left the business to his son and grandson, who grew up with this as the decoration in their house. It's designed to scare away evil spirits, and if they grow up with it, it doesn't scare them. If it doesn't scare them, certainly not going to scare away the undead. So they come up with their version, which, can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Wait, what do you mean it won't scare away the undead? What's the purpose behind that?
So the skeleton there is to scare away any of the undead spirits. They believed that the corrupted soul could easily be inhabited by demons and come back. So you put the stone on top of the head to make sure that it's harder for them to get up. You bury them, and then you put these warning symbols to remind the spirit that he doesn't belong, or at least remind the living that this isn't a good place to have a little midnight meeting.
You know, we say words so quick. Like when you think headstone, it's like, yeah, headstone, but it's a stone on top of the head, so you can't get up.
You'll hit your head on the bottom and leave us alone.
There you go. Interesting.
Oh,
Nancy, do you know why they...
John III comes up with this design, which is a corpse. The eyes and the nose and the mouth are all, kind of the gaunt appearance representing the decaying flesh. It's traditional funeral clothing. He still has wings, which are faint in this picture, but the feathers on the right wing always point upwards towards heaven.
That's where
and the feathers on the left wing always point downwards to where the corrupted flesh has probably ended up. And then the Grim Reaper's scythe is slicing through this hourglass, and all the sand is run out to the bottom.
So, John, are any of these graveyards in Newport haunted?
Oh, definitely. There's a lot of haunting going on in any time you get a large collection of graves. These particular pictures were taken in the common burying ground, which is on Farewell Street, and it's not Farewell because it's the way back to the Newport Bridge and out of town for our tourists, but this is the way out of town for your soul. And Farewell Street, the common burying ground, has somewhere between 8,000 and 10,000 bodies. Next to it is the Island Cemetery with 12,000 to 15,000 bodies, and then a number of other cemeteries along Farewell Street make Farewell Street the dubious honor of having the most dead people per mile of any road in America.
Wow.
John, when you say there's like 10,000 bodies, like there's not 10,000 headstones in there. So are they like...
No, there usually be about a third to a half that many headstones. That's
So are
why
they all crammed in together?
they're crammed in. They overlap. Somebody had returned a headstone that had been stolen, and somebody
jeez.
was repairing their walkway in Pennsylvania. And when
Huh.
they lifted up the stone, they found out that it was the grave of a child from
Oh, wow.
Newport. We returned it. They returned it, and when we tried to replant it, well, we hit other bodies and we just moved them aside. That was only a few years, maybe 5 years ago.
Oh, jeez.
Wow. Are there Indian burial grounds in Newport, and are some of those haunted too?
There are definitely, but they would be at this point long gone. We don't know of any directly visible Indian burial grounds. The Narragansett, the Wampanoag used cairns, piles of stones that they used to pile up. And if you go out to Coventry, you'll find those.
So, Nancy, I got a question for you. Do you know why they put Coke machines around graveyards?
So no.
Because Coke adds life.
Oh my God. Back to you, John. So, what's up?
This is an example of a gravestone that fell over for whatever reason.
Oh.
And this is by John Stevens' son, William. William carved these happy little cherubs.
Oh, I like those. But they're not going to scare away anybody.
No. Whoops, that's the wrong thing. However, if you look here at the bottom at what's supposed to be buried underground, William did a little doodling.
Huh.
And so it often makes me wonder what other things are doodled underneath our gravestone.
Well, it's just like a random guy face.
Did that have a purpose, that doodling, or?
It was for him to practice. He was practicing a new design. He wasn't that great of a stone carver at first. So he had a slave who was an excellent stone carver named Zingo. And so he often put his name on Zingo's work.
Okay.
This is an example of Zingo's work. This is the oldest piece of signed African-American work in existence.
No kidding.
No kidding.
And Zingo Stevens, who was a slave to William Stevens, carved this for his wife, Phyllis. She died in childbirth, as very often happened to women. So he carved her image on here. And in her arms here, very faintly, you can see the infant child that she's holding.
Zingo was a much better carver.
Yeah, you can tell.
She's wearing traditional African headdress. And then there's the Christian symbolism here. She was, it says here, faithful servant to Hosias Linden. So she was the slave of a man who became a colonial governor named Hosias. Zingo had a second wife who was named Elizabeth. And so he carved this beautiful angel. And you can see the difference between this cherub and the one that William had done.
Oh, yeah.
So his second wife died also.
Now those wings aren't going.
In childbirth, so the second wife and second child are buried underneath this stone.
Wow.
And then third wife and third child are buried underneath this stone, Violet.
Poor Zingo had a lot of bad luck.
Well, and by the time he has his third wife's headstone carved, it's, there's no pictures on it or anything. He's gotten tired, I guess, of burying his wife.
Hosias, this gravestone for Phyllis is back here. The governor helped contribute. Zingo was working for the shop, and he was able to work as a stone cutter on the side and buy his eventual freedom. By the second one, she didn't have a wealthy owner to contribute to the stone, so hers is a little bit more standard. And then by the time we get to Violet, the economy of Newport is starting to collapse.
I see.
And Zingo's fortunes are starting to fade. This is actually a grave by John Stevens of Hosias' grave, the Governor Linden. And it says on it, "Behold and see, for as I am, so shall thou be. And as thou art, so once was I. Be sure of this, that thou must die." So it's nice that Governor Linden felt it necessary to remind us that we're all going to die.
We're all mortal.
On his headstone in such a pleasant way.
And there's that weird skull face with the wings up top.
Yeah, the same skull face and that's what John Stevens. Of course, when John Stevens died, his son William, actually Zingo, carved his stone. So it's a beautiful cherubs. Even though John Stevens carved nothing but death heads.
Hmm.
What is the scariest Newport ghost story, John?
There are. It actually took place at a boarding house.
Actually,
A
can I
bunch of
interrupt you and just ask you to stop sharing so you're full screen, and then I'll give you some spooky music.
stop sharing. The scariest story in Newport is a bunch of our friends, actors, lived at a boarding house here in Newport. It was filled with just actors. Local actors had all gotten together and rented each individual rooms. They had ghosts all the time that were banging on the pipes. They considered the ghosts their friends. But eventually the house was sold and everybody was evicted to make way for bigger, better, newer construction, renovations. As they were being evicted, the ghosts became more and more aggressive. There were a lot more ghostly sounds. But it was after they left that the trouble really started. One of them went back to check on the mail and talked with the new owners. Apparently, they had a problem where up in an attic, they had uncovered an old dress, probably from the 1800s, that had what appeared to be a blood stain. They decided, the construction company, that it would be better to get rid of the dress than to deal with it, as if it would be considered a murder investigation. Their expensive construction would be shut down. So they just threw the dress in the dumpster and pretended that it was just paint that they found on the dress, which may have been the case. However, as soon as they did that, they started having a lot of really bizarre accidents. Things started falling on people, hammers, people were getting injured. And so the construction crew actually quit out of fear, and the construction laid bare for a long time, during which point there was a major storm that flooded out the basement, and it knocked down some hidden walls and revealed a secret room that had been filled with animal bones and occultist symbology painted all over the floor.
Wow.
So that was a case. I would say that was the only time where I ever heard of a ghost that wasn't something that was positive and light. And often when I talk to people that have ghosts in their homes, they say, if the ghost ever goes, it's like losing a family member.
John, when you're doing the tours, like can you remember a tour that you like they had such reactions you were like getting freaked out by it?
Well, here's the odd thing. I'm a brain injury survivor.
Yeah.
And one of the strange side effects of my injury is that it severed a piece of my vagus nerve,
Okay.
which controls fear. So I am not capable of being startled or frightened, which has its benefits, especially as a ghost tour guide. So there have been times when something has happened and my entire group, I've discovered that human beings in the dark can levitate for extended periods of times as they float away into the darkness. I've had entire groups just disappear. Most recently, it was in an alley, and it turned out it was a bunny rabbit that hopped out into the middle of the crowd, and all of a sudden, I was all alone on the street. Just me and a little bunny.
Oh my God!
One time, a young man was having a great time on the tour until the very end, and he looked at the headstone, and there was his name, and that was the end. He wet himself.
Really?
Poor thing. But he recovered from it. He had a good laugh about it once he realized.
Oh my God! Wasn't part of the show.
I always say it's the living in Newport that you've got to worry about. Come around the corner, and there's at one time there was somebody had made a life-sized balloon human being sculpture and tied it to a park bench. And in the dark, we came around the corner to this mysterious floating figure just wafting gently in the breeze.
Oh my gosh.
And as we got closer, finally figured out it was a balloon human.
That's great.
And you're like, nope, not feeling any fear yet.
But I've learned, and it's one of the benefits. We have lots of guides, and I trained them all, taught them how to be. You've got to be, as a guide, you've got to be light on your feet, because you can encounter some unsavory characters, and it's more entertaining for the group if we don't bump into them.
Of course.
And so we tend to be, there's a lot of improvisational activity involved.
John,
in,
what's the most haunted place in Newport? Like that gets
right
there.
now, the most actively haunted place is the Newport Artillery Company.
Where is
It's
that
on
located?
Clark Street. It is, the entire street is on the National Register of Historic Places, and right in the center is the Artillery Company, which they're the oldest artillery company in America. They were founded in 1741, and they still use their original charter. They still wear colonial style uniforms, and they operate a museum of military artifacts in the middle of Clark Street that's open. Definitely look them up, the Newport Artillery Company on Google. You'll find them. Great website. They have a collection of weapons and uniforms. For more than half a century, they've been requesting donations of uniforms from governments around the world. So they're on display, uniforms dating back to 1763 up to the present day, worn by kings, presidents, and generals around the world. And they have a lot of great weapons from all of the wars we've ever fought in, including the last 4 cannon in existence known to have been built by Paul Revere's foundry.
Oh.
And every 4th of July, they take those off and fire off beautiful 21 cannon salute.
That's cool. What makes it the most haunted, though?
Well, I think that part of it is that the building is in such a historic location, has such a deep history. It's a place where the men are very passionate about what they do. The Newport Artillery Company's been involved in every major conflict our nation has ever seen, right up to the present day. You still find that colonial flag flying above Humvees around the world. And also, a lot of the weapons that they have and uniforms that they have are worn by people who are killed in combat, or the weapons were fired in combat. There's a lot of death attached to a lot of the artifacts that are on display in the museum.
And violent death too.
There is also another great place that's actively haunted out on Brenton Point, out on Ocean Drive. If you have ever been out to Ocean Drive, Brenton Point is a great spot. I'm going to share a couple of pictures of Brenton Point as soon as I get them up. Brenton Point, once upon a time, was known as Graves Point. It is a place where there are a lot of shipwrecks. This is a picture of a tanker in the fog off of Brenton Point, and you can see how that fog just obliterates part of the tanker. This is a storm along the seawall there. The waves can come in pretty tragically. This is again at Brenton Point. You can see that wall of fog that it makes things invisible. This is actually on the inner harbor, but the story I'm about to tell you is a ghost story, a ghost ship that has a similar fate to this one, and another one that I happened upon here in Newport. The ghost ship was the Minerva. On Christmas Eve in 1810, the Minerva was sailing from Havana to Bristol, and it encountered a strong nor'easter, a heavy blizzard with driving winds, waves, hurricane force winds that absolutely were destroying it. They drove it into those rocks that you saw there at Brenton Point, and the ship was slowly being ground to death. The captain, Agil Cofuenter, started calling for assistance from shore. The only way he could do that was by firing off the ship's cannon, which he fired off every minute as a begging distress call. But the sea had no mercy and just ground the ship to pieces. There were 9 survivors pulled out of the sea before anyone could reach the Minerva to help. The ship slowly sank. They found, over the coming weeks, they found 3 bodies, including Captain Angel and his mate and the ship's cook. And those bodies are buried right at the at Castle Hill in unmarked graves. So you never know when you're stepping over a grave in Newport. And today, even still, the people report hearing, especially in storms, especially around Christmas, the sound of that minute gun being fired off every minute. One of the truly haunting ghostly stories of Newport. In fact, the place is so dangerous that in 1904, a second ship hit the same rock and sank on top of it. So professional divers who've been down there, it's very treacherous water, to say that the Minerva's wreck and the wreck of the George Humphreys are co-mingled down there on the ocean floor in about 20 feet of water.
Wow.
John, where are the most sightings of ghosts?
I would say the Bells. The Bells is the remains of the Theodore Davis estate. He was a very shady businessman who made a fortune by swindling people, became fabulously wealthy because he swindled the right people and got the right properties that ended up having a lot of copper mines.
Of course.
So he became extremely wealthy. He, in 1882, he purchased 25 acres out on Brenton Point, and he, for $20,000, he purchased the land, and then spent another $50,000 to build a beautiful estate, an Italian-style villa. It was absolutely gorgeous. Had 30 rooms. It had a 3-story tower. The gardens were designed by Frederick Law Olmsted, who had designed Central Park, among other places. He had placed on there a separate heating room because the heating equipment was so loud and smelled so bad, but that was where the servants lived. And then he also had a stables that he built that had servants room for 10 servants, and a clock tower with a 4-face clock and chimes and a windmill attached to it. Huge palatial estate. He would summer here in Newport, in winter in Egypt, where he became one of the first famous Egyptologists. He discovered over 30 Egyptian tombs in the Valley of the Kings.
Wow.
Then famously said, "I have discovered everything there is in the Valley of the Kings." But several years later, his assistant discovered 6 feet away from his last dig, King Tut's tomb, and overshadowed all of his work. But for a time, his estate, which he called the Reef, held the largest collection of Egyptian antiquities in the Western Hemisphere.
Oh, wow.
So he filled it with mummies. After his death, it was purchased by the Budlong family, who quickly had a very bitter divorce. And after their divorce, the property was abandoned. It fell into disrepair. This is the remains of the stables. Out there. These are on Ocean Drive. Now, if you
John,
go out,
I've been there many times.
Are you
it
serious?
is a place
So
where
have
people
I.
go
I never
and-
knew what that was.
I didn't know what it was, but I've been there many times. Yes.
Why?
It's an interesting.
It's
place
an
to
interesting
go.
place to go. I mean,
This is the
yeah.
inside. You can see across.
You can just
the
walk
top
all
here,
over it?
Yeah.
where
Not
the
legally.
roof is caving in. You're not allowed to go inside. I got special permission from the park to come in.
It's
Oh,
fenced
did you get
off. At least it
special
was. No.
It is still fenced off. You would have to climb over a fence and
This
be there
is
illegally.
when I was
You
a
can't
kid.
say that obviously
Oh.
nobody does that. This is
And-
where
Sure
the
it wasn't
horses
last
would
week.
have
No,
been
we used
kept.
to do mischievous things as kids, and
That's why you have the wings going down on your side.
yeah.
So,
And this is the remains of the tower. And if you go out down the paths, you can still climb these. They built new stairs. They don't want you climbing these stairs.
Yeah,
anymore.
for good reason.
But they
What's
built
the
these
purpose of
stairs,
the
and this is an
tower, John?
observation tower now.
Observation tower.
oh, that's
the
what it was
views
when he
from
built
up
it?
Here are panoramic views of the
Oh.
ocean.
Yeah.
Okay.
Newport is it's a beautiful, beautiful.
So, what do
place.
people see ghosts of over there?
So out here, there are reports of Egyptian ghosts.
Of
There are
course.
reports of horses. I mean, there's no horses there today. I interviewed somebody who was a sensitive, who said that he encountered a group of what appeared to be 19th century partygoers just wandering around in the woods out there. It is a place that our locals often report just ghost story after ghost story. And I have to say, in truth, a lot of ghost stories do start with the phrase, "Okay, we were drinking a lot, but I swear we all saw this." And the great thing about Newport is there's so many ghost stories that you get to then get corroborating witnesses from different times, people of different levels of sobriety. Out there in the Bells is a place that is full of a lot of energy as this place slowly decays and is reclaimed by the land. And in fact, that was not an uncommon fate for those mansions. The robber barons called Newporters. The quote was, "Newporters are our footstools." And so, as after the Depression, the wealthy wanted to live in Hollywood, and these cottages were the home of Grandpa. They were the
Oh.
stogy old estates. You didn't really want to own that. They were abandoned. Newporters went in, and some 135 of them were just destroyed by vandalism, and all kinds of mischief, as you can see from the remains of the bells.
John, what's
Amazing.
your favorite ghost story? Like, what do you love to tell and talk about?
I love to tell the Rebecca Cornell story. I love to talk about a lot of the history. In downtown Newport, we have this really great, vibrant society. I feel like we're constantly making new ghost stories, and so one of my favorites to tell, as I'm going to go back to the pictures and go forward, um, is as I've been walking through town, I bumped into this gentleman
Oh, who's this dude?
as I walked past him.
Are
He
you
was here
serious? Who's
filming
this
The
dude?
Gilded Age.
You know who he is.
And I said to myself, that looks like, no, it can't be Mr. Lane. And he went, yes. And I managed to get a picture of him.
Cool.
But more recently, we, of course, had what just came out, the movie Hocus Pocus 2 filmed here.
Right.
This is our old colony house. And I know that there are some interesting scenes that take place here. This is ye old Salem magic shop that they built here in Newport with all fake vegetation. And
That's
this is just a
fake?
facade.
Really?
And they tore it all down. This is actually a parking lot.
Wow.
Oh,
Parking lot before and after. With our history, this is during Hurricane Sandy here in Newport.
right.
And this is a fire that took place in Newport in 2007. The building had been built in 1790s and was burned down by an arsonist. Is a shop called the House of Scrimshaw.
Oh, no.
What I love is when I talk about Newport and the way that it's developing and the way that its stories go, whether they're ghosts or the histories, the way that they all intertwine, and the way that Newport, its history is being written, even as we are all, each of us, a part of that history. And I urge people to, talk to your parents and your grandparents and get their stories down. We often forget that the important parts of history are the personal parts of
That's
history.
very true, John. Very
And so
true.
that is what really drives me when I'm looking for stories, when I'm telling stories. I'd much rather read the history of milk than to read the history of the War of 1812. I've got books here, the history of women's shoes. I like the specific stuff, the personal stuff, the recipes that pirates used, which included for meat, whatever seagull you catch, or if you can't catch seagull, throw in some rat from below decks. Tells a
Oh.
very important part of our history. And when you think about a pirate with a parrot, something like a parrot is just showing off. I've got a parrot. That means my ship, we don't have to eat the parrot. So that's how successful
Oh.
we are.
Right.
And bringing home a pineapple, we're so successful. We brought home a pineapple. That's showing off. It's those little details that fascinate me. And so, as to what specific ghost story, I love them all. I love the way that they intermingle and the way that they touch us in a personal way to our soul. And I love to hear people tell me ghost stories all the time. I love to hear people.
We probably have a couple ghost stories.
So
we
tell
could
me
tell.
your ghost story.
I've got a couple good ghost stories.
Tell me the scariest one.
The scariest. I'm going to tell you two stories, and these are very personal stories. So the
Ooh.
first one, I was about 8 or 10 years old, and I lived in the second floor apartment of a triple-decker home in Fall River. And the story was that, as it was back then in the 1800s when the house was built, a number of people died in the home. People died in their homes back then. So, the house was supposedly haunted. Who knows? But I remember being about 8 years old and going down to the basement, and it was a very spooky basement. Kind of a dirt floor, poor lighting, one little light bulb hanging from the ceiling with a bunch of cobwebs around. You can get the idea, right?
Yeah,
It was a
definitely.
cellar.
It was, and there was this hallway that went down, and there were doors on each side. Two doors on one side, two doors on the other, and there was a door at the end. And the door on the end was my dad had kept some tools there. It was a shop. I never went in those rooms. I was too scared to even go down the basement. One day I got up the courage, went down the basement, and I decided I was going to go into one of the rooms. So I went to the first room on the left, and I opened the door, and I looked in, and I'd never been in this room before. It was pitch black. And it was pitch black, and then I saw a figure stand up that was darker than the darkness in the room, and it started walking towards me, and I took off, and that's the last time I went down to that basement. Now, whether it was real, whether it was my imagination as an 8-year-old, I don't know. But the second story I have is really interesting. When I was we had moved from that house some years later, and we lived near Oak Grove Cemetery, which is where Lizzie Borden is buried. The whole Borden family is there, actually. And then my brothers and I would very often go bike riding through the cemetery. It was a quiet ride, and there were different times. You don't really do that now, of course, but we spent a lot of our times in the graveyard there. And I had a friend of mine who, I guess you used the word sensitive. I'll use that word because he had, experienced numerous encounters with spirits in the past. And I didn't tell him where we were going, and I didn't even know we were going to end up there, but we were taking a walk through the graveyard, through the cemetery, I should say. And all of a sudden, he looked at me, he turned white as a ghost, and he started shaking. He was just trembling. And I said, "What's wrong?" He says, "I feel something. I feel a presence." And I looked down, and he was standing on Lizzie Borden's grave.
Oh.
And it's a flat stone. Lizzie Borden just has a flat stone. That's
Right,
all it is. It's
right.
not a headstone or
Right.
anything. And he was standing right on the darn thing. He didn't even know, I mean, I kind of knew we were in the area, but I hadn't been there for a few years at that point. And, we were adults, I hadn't been there since I was a kid. We were probably at that point around maybe 20 years old or so when this happened. But I thought he was going to have a seizure. He was just
Oh my
freaked out.
God.
So, I mean, he had no sense of where we were, that we were over near Lizzie Borden's grave, and he had this experience. To me, that was very telling. It was interesting.
Definitely.
There is one grave picture I'd like to show you,
Hmm.
because we talk about innocence
Right.
and you innocent kids. This is the grave of Godfrey Malbone Hunter in the Trinity Church graveyard, who died when he was only 17 days old.
Oh.
And so the artist left off that left wing. He only has the
Okay.
right wing.
Well, that's
So
nice.
there's the innocence of youth that we
Right.
believe in here in colonial Newport.
Why
Um,
the sickle, John? Like, why do they put
I
that
think
Grim
it's the Grim
Reaper
Reaper,
thing?
yeah.
Well, the
Just-
reaper is a harvester. The sickle is a way of harvesting wheat, which was well known to the people at the time, very wheat, barley based culture. And so the Grim Reaper is just a farmer who harvests souls in the same way that a farmer would harvest wheat with the sickle.
Interesting. Now, Tyler, you had mentioned that you might have a story, too. Do you want to share that with us?
I do have a story. If you want to hear it, I can try and make it as brief as I can.
Sure.
No, go for it.
So Tyler's our engineer. You can't see him, but he's back here doing all the magic.
I'm behind the scenes, and I don't want to bore you too much with it, but oh geez. Let's see. I have a few from one singular location, and I'll try and make them brief. But basically, I used to work in a group home, and the group home was actually a renovated funeral home here in Portsmouth. So we were in Portsmouth. I remember the first day that I came in. I remember it had a big horseshoe driveway. It was very strange. The layout was very strange. It had two entrances on the front and a large parking lot in the rear. And I noticed that we had two basements, and one of them was an old cellar made of stone, dirt floors, very low ceiling, and the other it looked like something out of the 50s or 60s. And there was a bathroom with a shower and a sink and no toilet. And it turns out that that's where they would prepare the bodies. And I noticed that the plumbing in one side of the house was actually on the outside of the walls, meaning that they had added the plumbing after the house was built.
Okay.
It wasn't part of the original house. And I had made a comment about the home, and I said, what did this used to be before it was what it is? And my manager said, "Who told you? Who said anything to you? You're not supposed to know any of that." And I was like, "I'm just looking around. I'm just being observant. I noticed that there's pipes on the outside of the walls instead of in the walls. I know that, this must have been a very old home. It's strange that there's 2 entrances. It had a big parlor area, what I can only describe as like a solarium in the back and a library. It was a huge, huge location, and it turned out to be a funeral home. There were a couple of stories about a little boy who would run around, a couple of stories about a ghostly man in a hat, which is a very common.
Yes.
Yeah. Yep. So shadow men,
The fedora
obviously.
hat,
Yes.
yeah.
Look, just like you with your
Just like
beautiful
John.
hat.
You, John. Busy again.
And numerous people had seen the man in the hat. At one point, we had again, it being a group home, sometimes we had fights break out. We had a police officer staying over one night. They were on the 2nd floor by the main wraparound staircase. It had almost like a grand staircase where it led up to the bedrooms. And she came down and she said, a man in a hat just walked out of one of those rooms, looked me dead in the eyes, and walked down the hallway. And she left. She was a police officer. And that is a pretty telling sign. But
yes.
as for me, I chased the little boy. I don't want to bore you with that one. I've got a couple of them that I could tell you, but the one that really strikes me the most, and this is the strangest one, there were reports of the little boy, the man in the hat, and the one that I saw, which I've seen a few, but the one that really kind of like shook me and made me question myself. There was a second staircase that came down out of the kitchen area into the 1st floor. And it led directly to a pair of double doors that were an emergency exit that went out into the back. And a long time ago, I guess, they used to hear rattling on those doors. And slowly but surely, after we reopened the funeral home, because again, it actually was a battered women's shelter in the 70s, and then it was closed down when people claimed that the man in the hat was telling them to kill themselves. It developed a reputation, so they ended up not using it for
Right.
quite a while. Anyway, because it's a group home, there were silent alarms, and the police had to report to our location. And when they showed back up, I guess some of them on the force were familiar with the old stories about the rattling doors, and they made a comment to the people that were working overnight about them used to get calls all the time sounding like somebody was trying to break in through these double doors. And this happened consistently for the years that I was there after we opened it back up.
So weird.
We got this rattling in the middle of the night, somewhere between like midnight and 3 a.m. It would constantly happen. We would call the police would come, there would be nobody there. Anyway, I am now walking into the back area where this like library is with the double doors. It's on the very far end of the house, and that staircase that goes into the kitchen leads directly out into this darkly lit area. I had turned the library into a sort of stage for the children to put on plays. It was dinner time, and I decided I would go into the back and turn the lights on, and we would put on a play before we had dinner. And as I was making my way between the living room area into this little alcove that then jumped into the double door area in the library, a man in a flannel shirt, he was balding and had no legs, came down the staircase and almost bumped into me. And the weird part was that he looked at me like I was an asshole. I don't know how else to describe it other than we saw each other, and he made this face to me like watch where you're going, like this kind of, the New Englander like shoulder check, like he put his shoulders up and he made a face at me. And he had no legs. He was muted colors. It was like a red flannel muted color shirt. And he was kind of balding, 5 o'clock shadow. And then he walks into the dark of the back of the house where the double doors are. And I froze completely. Couldn't move. I was like, because I couldn't even comprehend what I just saw. I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, that was a person. Like, I thought maybe I wasn't focused on their legs. Maybe I didn't see the legs because I wasn't looking. So now I'm like, there's a person back there, but I'm terrified and slightly ashamed to admit this. But I said, who's brave enough to go in the back and turn the lights on to see if one of the kids would go turn the lights on for me, because I am now
Great.
I'm like, well, my fight or flight will kick in, right? Like one of these kids is going to go back, they're
course.
going to scream, and then I'm going to
Right.
run in there and I'm going to save them, because it'll snap me out of it. Sure enough, they went back there, turn the lights on, nobody's there. And I didn't tell anybody about it because I was so confused about what had happened, because we heard the stories about the man in the hat, we heard the stories about the
Right.
little boy, all of these things, right? But never a story about
A legless lumberjack.
right, exactly. And then the freaky thing happened.
Oh, that wasn't.
Oh,
the
that
freaky
wasn't the
thing.
freaky thing.
So
Okay, there's a freakier thing.
oh, there is a freakier
Of course,
thing.
it's Tyler.
So I don't tell any of the children about this. Obviously, I want to keep it away from their minds, because I don't want to have to deal with the 2 a.m. phone calls
Right.
of them freaking out and everything like that. And, they're all taking turns. Oh, I saw a woman in white. And they described the woman from The Grudge. And I'm like, no. Because eventually one of the staff told the children that it was an old funeral home. So, of course, then they all start seeing ghosts.
Yeah.
Anyway, one of them comes home from the middle school, and it turns out that the gym teacher at the middle school used to work at the battered women's shelter in the 70s. That is the same
Right.
place now where I work. They come home and they say, I know about the ghosts that are here. And I'm like, oh, really? Because again, every single time they've said something, they describe the girl from The Grudge. They describe the girl from The Ring. And, it's always a woman in white, and it's so scary, and her hair's in front of her face. And she goes, there's a bald man in a flannel shirt that walks in the back area and tries to get out the double doors. And I get goosebumps. Even now telling this, I
Oh
get
my
goosebumps.
God.
And I am like in
There's just
shock.
like something to all this.
I had
you know?
I could not. I'm like, what? And I'm trying to play it off. Like, what makes you think that that's the case? And she says, my gym teacher used to work here back when it was a battered women's shelter. And he said that they used to see this man in a red flannel shirt walking around back there. And every person that I work with had a story about the man in the hat, the little boy. Even I saw the little boy. I never saw the man in the hat. But I mean, that one wasn't on the list.
Right.
Nobody had
Right.
ever said anything about
Oh my
that.
God.
And then here I have a kid coming home. They don't know about it. And they're telling me that a guy that used to work here 30, 40 years ago, he saw this thing. And I was just, that has to be one of the
Yeah.
creepiest stories that I have.
Tyler, I think you beat my Lizzie Borden
Oh,
story.
yeah,
That's
that's
really
creepy.
good. That's really good. That's wild.
I don't know, but the Lizzie Borden at least takes place in a graveyard.
That's true. That's
It
true.
does. That is true. That is true. Extra points.
But
for that.
I will say Portsmouth. Portsmouth had the poorhouse, which is on the is no longer there, but there's a graveyard on the Raytheon property that was the Portsmouth poorhouse.
There's a graveyard on the Raytheon property.
Yes. Oh, you would be surprised where the bodies are buried in Newport.
Oh, my God.
I can't say that there's a body buried at the front steps of the CVS on Bellevue Avenue, because that wouldn't have been legal at all.
Right.
Yeah,
no,
really.
no.
No.
To put somebody's ashes in the cement at the front steps. But if you ever see a bunch of flowers,
Are we talking about your first wife?
Oh my god. Oh my god. So
No, this woman wanted to be there apparently,
wow.
Huh?
but her kids did not put her ashes there. It's just-
No.
No,
of
did
course
not,
not.
did
Who
not,
would
of
do
course.
the
that?
flowers are there just to commemorate what they
Decoration.
could have done.
Yeah.
So John, here's a little funny story. It'll take 30 seconds. We're getting towards the end of our podcast, but 2 years ago, I went to a house party and they had a clairvoyant there. And, they were all taking turns having the clairvoyant, kind of read, what was, talk to them about their future and all that. And I don't really believe in that, but
I do.
they don't know anything about, they didn't know what I do for work. And I don't know if you know this, but I'm a physician. So, I've witnessed many, many, many people over the years die personally, and I've had many patients die. So I go in to see this clairvoyant, and I walk in, and her eyes go wide, and she goes, "Oh my God, I've never seen so many dead people around a person before." And they all seem really grateful. They seem like they like you. They seem like they, they're not mean spirited. They're actually, they seem very benevolent, but they're appreciative. But there's a lot of them. What do you do for a job?
God.
I said, well,
Figures your entourage is
I'm a
spirits.
physician. I work in hospice, and I've been involved with a lot of deaths over the years. And it was kind of weird. It really was.
Well, it's nice that they're hanging around to kind of
Yeah, as long as they're the benevolent ones. But John, that
Right.
brings me to the last question. What is your real take on like why ghosts exist?
I think that ghosts exist for the same reason that any of us has any faith in anything. Whether our
Mhm.
faith is in the real world, whether it's in science, whether it's in God or gods, uh, it's ghosts exist because we exist.
Mhm.
And the act of existing is just such a potent and powerful act to be a part of that I think that we bring into our world things that we want. It's a question that I've often asked myself. Why are our ghost stories always about people like us? We don't hear 30,000 years of people living here, and the majority of ghost stories happened within the past 400 years. And I think that's because it's the people that are alive today are familiar with that culture. If you talk to a Wampanoag or a Narragansett, then their ghost stories from the same spot are going to be a completely different cultural experience, spiritual experience. Our ghosts, what we can connect with, are all a part of what our beliefs are and what is in our heart.
John,
And I'm gonna
if people,
go ahead.
well, no, you go, because I was going to just ask you about signing up for a ghost tour.
There's a couple of stones that I want to point out just really quick that are some of my favorite things. This one is by John Bull, and Mrs. Tripp had 2 children who died, and they were buried under the same stone because they saved up to get 1 stone. She also had an arm amputated, and so the artist carved the severed arm.
I was like, what is that?
Oh my goodness.
Really?
So this is and they believed that you had to get buried in consecrated ground to go to heaven, and so they buried the arm so that it would be waiting for her. And on my when I used to do cemetery tours, I'd stop here.
Interesting.
And one child said, "Is there like a waiting room full of arms?" Is that John Bull also carved this one. 6 children, the Langley children, and the odd thing is they're 3 boys and 3 girls. It's William, Royal, and Nathaniel are the boys, but the girls' names are Sarah the First, Sarah the Second, and Sarah the Third.
No.
And I can't imagine recycling a name.
No.
That is
But
wild.
it's
Did they
a
all
part of.
die as babies? Were they all like kids?
They died young. They all
Yeah.
died before they were 5.
Can you imagine Sarah?
And
one?
John Bull
Sarah
also
version
carved
point
this.
2.0.
This is one of the most unique headstones in all of New England, certainly. Charles Barden, who died in 1773, is buried underneath this stone, and you can see the carving is God personally welcoming Charles Barden into heaven through the clouds. He doesn't have to worry about the left wing at all.
I guess not. He's gone.
This is a matter of an immense ego.
Right.
But
I
in
like that, though.
1773, Massachusetts, the Puritans would have screamed bloody murder. How dare you carve God?
Right.
But here in Rhode Island, God is carved on a single headstone for a single man, personally welcoming into heaven.
That's amazing.
And when we think about how people die and how we view that, those kind of carvings tell so much about our culture and about
Right.
what
Oh
we
my God.
believe. And of course, ghosts everywhere.
Right.
It's
You just
crazy,
have to look
too.
for them.
What's even allowed to be carved on a
Right.
gravestone still, if it's not approved and biblical
Mhm.
enough and everything else,
They don't carve breasts on them anymore.
No, those pomegranates. No, not anymore.
John, I want to thank you. This has really been great. It's been
Thank
did
you.
it.
I had a lot of fun.
It's been
I
a
hope
one. I
everybody
mean,
has an awesome
I'm sure that
Halloween.
our viewers are going to really enjoy this, and we love doing these special podcasts around the holidays, and this has been a great one. Do you want to tell our viewers how they can sign up for a tour potentially, and even you're going to be in a play, a theater production coming up too, so you can talk about that if you don't mind.
So ghostsofnewport.com is the website. You can go and find out information about ghost tours, make reservations. We do ghost tours typically from starting in April on weekends, and then we run almost 7 nights a week, starting June through October. We continue ghost tours on weekends through November. And then I even do Christmas tours through December,
That's
sometimes even tours in February. So
That's great.
there's always time to pick a tour, historical tours of Newport, ghost tours of Newport. Just always look on the website for anything you might be
These are
interested.
walking tours. Is that what they are?
They're all walking tours.
Okay.
They tend to begin at the Newport Marriott,
Okay.
nice warm place with
Yeah.
bathrooms and a bar.
That's great.
The handy things that you need when you're going wandering
Right.
around Newport.
Right.
Of course.
Bathrooms and a bar, and public parking there. It's
I think
paid public parking, but there's public parking.
I don't know about
there.
you, Nancy. I think I'm going to sign up for one of these. Definitely.
I want to, and I think you should wear your outfit.
I will.
Could we get a
Well, people
personal
do come
tour
in
with
costume.
you? If we brought the children and all of us came down, would you be willing to guide us around?
I would be happy to.
That's great.
Aw.
And John, how about this theater production that you're going to be in?
And I also am doing a play called Under the Lintel. I play a librarian who is a 113-year overdue book has come in the night slot. How dare they? And he starts to unravel this mystery. He's looking for this, what he believes to be this mythological creature or man who had witnessed the execution of Jesus and had gotten on God's bad side and was doomed to walk the earth forever. And so he's searching for this man. And in his search, of course, he's grappling with his own mistakes that he's made in his life, and trying to learn how to embrace life after having failed at it so long, and also learning how to forgive, especially the most important forgiveness of all, the forgiveness of yourself. And that will be running from November 16th through 20th at the Edward King House here in Newport. It's one of the first summer cottages for the really wealthy that was built in town.
great.
But now it's a senior center and theater space that puts on
Excellent.
performances. And I'm lucky to be doing this fabulous, really touching one-man show in November.
That's awesome.
Nice.
So just
John,
look that up online. Also, of course, my book, Ghosts of Newport, and my book, Newport Live. Newport Live is available on Amazon and at a couple of the bookstores in town. Ghosts of Newport is pretty much
I'm gonna read
available
that,
all
Ghosts of
over the
Newport.
place. And then the children's version, Ghostly Tales of Newport, as well.
Nice.
All available online.
That's awesome. John, thanks so much. This has been really
Thank you,
fabulous. We've
John.
really enjoyed this. It's been fun.
It's been a lot
And
of
I
fun.
know that our viewers will really enjoy this a lot too. So thank you. And
Thank you.
And for everyone out there, remember, you can get our podcast on your favorite podcast platform. You can also go to YouTube and look up 27 Degrees Consulting, and please follow us too. And you'll then get notification about what's coming up next and all
Yeah.
that. I want to thank Bay Coast Bank, which is just right for all your financial needs. Visit baycoast.bank or call 508-678-7641 to learn more. John, once again, thank you. It's been great. And everyone, we'll see you again in another week or so. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Nancy, Chris, and Tyler.
Bye.